This is the Bison 68 pound thrust 12 volt electric motor, and this, unfortunately enough, is one of the two batteries that I've got to go with it, but we'll come on to that. This is really, I suppose, a trolling motor, so it's designed to move your boat at quite slow speed whilst you tow lures behind to try and catch predators. But I've been using it in the Norfolk Broads and trolling's not allowed, so I haven't been using it that way. I've been using it as an outboard to get the boat from A to B. So that's the context in which I'm going to talk about this today. As you can see, it's quite a neat little thing. It's not too heavy, certainly a lot lighter than a petrol outboard. It has its pros and cons compared with a petrol one. What I'll do is I'll show you some footage from a few fishing trips in which we've used this pike season just finished, and I'll tell you some of the things I like about it, some of the things I don't like about it, and maybe compare this to a petrol one, which is realistically your other option. But one of the really nice things about these electric motors is, with a petrol outboard, your steering range travel is probably maybe something like that, kind of lock to lock. So if you want to turn around quickly, you have to give it more power in order to spin the boat round faster. You can't really make a tight, slow circle, but this electric motor will go more than perpendicular to the back of the boat. So actually, put that on speed setting 1 and you'll just do a slow pirouette. You can turn within the length of the boat. It's like going from driving something with wheels to a tracked vehicle. It's that kind of difference, and it's so good for manoeuvring around your mooring, especially if you're in a crowded mooring with lots of other boats. Brilliant, makes life so much easier. The handle extends, which is nice, so depending on how far you're sitting away from it, what kind of boat you're on, you can use it like that, and it lifts up, so you can use it standing up nice and easily, especially with the handle extended, which is sometimes really handy. You can see ahead a little better. So another one of the things I like about the electric motor, there's no starting procedure. It's connected to the battery, so we can go. You haven't got to start it, doesn't matter if it's cold, you haven't got to use choke or anything like that. Now this is speed number 1. It's probably about walking pace, but it's great for manoeuvring around your mooring. Number 2, you do notice just about a little increase. And 3, that's a bit more reasonable and it's a bit more noticeable. And 4, I'd say we're probably doing 3 or 4 miles per hour right now. And it doesn't seem to rinse the battery too badly. Number 5, a noticeable increase. And we're probably doing 4 or 5 miles per hour, but it does eat the battery pretty quick. Anyway, irrespective of what setting you've got it on, I'd imagine you can probably hear me okay over this. All you're getting is a bit of splashing of water. If I was using a petrol outboard, I'd be shouting and you'd be struggling to hear what I'm saying. And let's be honest, I'm out here to enjoy it, to see the wildlife, to listen to the birds singing. It's so much nicer with that quiet electric motor. And I'm convinced that if you cruise up to the spot you want to fish with one of these, especially if you kind of knock the speed off gently as you come in, and then just drift in like this, you must spook fewer fish than if you've got a petrol motor thrashing away at the back there. Just my personal belief, but I reckon it gives you a better chance of catching. It is largely plastic construction, and one of the concerns I did have originally was whether these plastic handles on the clamp threads would be strong enough, but they haven't given any problems so far, seem pretty robust. You don't have to really clamp it too hard. You don't want it falling off the back of the boat, but it doesn't produce enough vibration that you really need to crank on that. This whole clamping block here is plastic, and that, like I say, was perhaps a concern initially, but so far it seems fine. The actual motor housing is metal, and you've got a little sort of rudder on here which is metal, and that's pretty robust. Certainly that's been dinged into the odd rock already, and it's fine. The prop is plastic and is perhaps less strong. They do supply a spare with the motor. We've done a fair few miles with this now, and there's a few little notches out of it, but it's still in pretty good shape. As you'd hope with an electric motor, setup is really simple. You have to fit the prop on and do a little bit of assembly when it arrives. Other than that, it's pretty much ready to go straight out of the box. Just plug these onto the battery and you're set. And you've got 5 different power indicators on the top there, little blue LEDs. What I have found is that if you use top speed, it does drain the battery pretty quick. But anything else you can stretch and do it a bit more economical. So Drew and I went out last weekend using this motor. We were on a bigger boat. It was a Orkney longliner. For those of you that means anything to, probably 2-3 foot longer than this, 18 inches 2 foot broader beam, much bigger sides. I'd say must be twice the volume of this. Maybe not twice the weight, because I think these are pretty heavy for their size. But with Drew on board as well, don't know what he weighs. He eats enough, he's probably at least 12 stone. And we did 5 or 6 miles on the 2 batteries. So not bad range really at all. That was up and down quite a large river with a bit of tidal influence, and at times into a headwind as well. I was sticking mostly to speed 4 to extend the range, but yeah, managed it, got back with enough of a safety margin kind of thing. Really quite impressed with it. So at the time of purchase this was $209.99, which is really quite cheap. I think it's good value for what you get for it, and if you compare it to buying a petrol engine, I mean, you're going to be looking at a second-hand motor for that money, whereas you can buy one of these new. However, you do need batteries, so I've got 2 of these. These are 130 amp hour 12 volt deep cycle leisure batteries, and you do need to get deep cycle ones. The 2 together were about 150 odd quid, so you're looking at a total cost of sort of 360, which does bring you back into a more sensible budget, certainly for a second-hand petrol motor. You're probably still going to struggle to find one new, or certainly one that's worth having. Just like with all electric vehicles really, I think the batteries are the limiting factor at the minute. So this is pretty light and compact for what it is. These are quite chunky, quite heavy. I've got 2 of these to move around, and 2 of them you'll get a reasonable range, especially if you're a little bit conservative with using the power. You don't use top speed too much. If you're going into a headwind, that can really make a significant difference. I used this 2 consecutive weekends running, and I probably got, I'm going to say, around a third of the range out of each battery when I was travelling into a strong headwind between one weekend and the next. Now a 68 pound thrust motor is pretty good. It's one of the most powerful you can get at 12 volt. You can get more power than that if you go to 24 volt, but then you're going to be running these batteries in series instead of using one and then having a spare. So if you want to kind of have that backup, then you're going to have to buy 4. It gets even more expensive, so we didn't go down that route. It's enough power to move you along in a small boat, at a sensible speed. You won't be going anywhere quickly, but when we're fishing we don't really often need to. I would say if you're having to deal with really strong flow, a lot of tide, something like that, maybe this isn't for you. I wouldn't take this out to sea. It is saltwater rated apparently, but I just wouldn't be too confident about that. So having used this a bit, I'd say I've got 1.5 criticisms of it. I'm going to say 1.5 because I'm going to play devil's advocate and counter one of my own, so I'm not going to call it 2. First criticism is that it does lack power compared with a similar petrol motor, or a similar size petrol motor, a similar budget overall. You know, you could get at least a 4 horsepower petrol motor for the same sort of money as this and the batteries. It's going to be quicker, it's going to deal with tide and headwind better, and it's going to give you more range. But that's not really a criticism of the motor, that's a criticism of the battery, because the problem is that these can't match the energy density of petrol. If you had the same amount of petrol as you got the volume of 2 of these batteries, you would be going further out and you'd be going faster. The only other criticism I've got is that the petrol motors have a dead man switch. So they have a little lanyard you can attach to your wrist. If you fall overboard, pulls out the ignition switch, cuts the motor, and this doesn't have anything like that. And that's a good safety feature to have, and these just lack it. Okay, you could probably jury rig something so that if you fell overboard it pulled one of these connections off. I wouldn't really want to do that. There's always a risk that you could accidentally become tethered to the boat by something like that, and that's kind of worst case scenario. If you fall overboard and you're tethered to it, you're being towed, that's a really bad situation. Obviously the best safety measure to mitigate that is to have at least one other person in the boat with you, and then if the person using this motor did fall overboard and the boat keeps going, the other person can switch it off.
So in conclusion then, I'm really impressed with this. I think it represents good value for money and I really enjoy using it. It's easier to use than a petrol motor, it's maintenance free, it's nicer to store because there's not going to be any oil leaking out of it or anything like that. Don't have to deal with petrol, no fumes. The quietness of it is the key thing. Trying to speak to somebody in the boat whilst using the petrol outboard is like having a conversation whilst mowing the lawn. Doesn't really happen. There's something about being out on the water with this almost silent motor that is really enjoyable. If you need the extra power, you need the extra speed, especially if it's a safety issue, you're going to use it in a strong tide or something like that, this isn't for you, you're still going to have to go for petrol. But technology was getting there, batteries are improving, and at some point these electric ones will come up to that standard. And interestingly, I think the Broads Authority are trying to encourage people to use electric because the toll is a little bit lower if you're using an electric motor as opposed to an internal combustion one for any given size of boat. So hopefully someday it will be an even more lovely place to be. You won't have all that racket from everyone's outboards.